South African Defence Force Chief General Solly Shoke will be stepping down after 10 years on the job. He believes the South African National Defence Force needs to be better funded to meet the threats such as the Mozambican insurgency that we saw recently. General Shoke joins me now in a conversation to talk about some of the successes and perhaps challenges you have faced, General, during your tenure here. You've led the SANDF for 10 years. What would you say are some of the main achievements that you can point to of the last decade?
Oh, thank you, Xoli. If I'm to point out, in fact, the success that the Defence Force has done, maybe I'll have to take you to some of the rescue missions that we have done in Mozambique, when we have been helping almost year after year with the floods, where the South African Air Force and Army engineers and personnel have been at the forefront. And then when I go up to the Eastern DRC, we have been involved in peace support operations, and of course also with outreach programs in the areas where we deployed. We have been successful in the Sudan area, Darfur, where we deployed in peacekeeping operations. And then of course, although it was before my tenure, but I was chief of the army by then, where we helped in Burundi to bring peace and stability in that part of the world.
General, I'm sorry to interrupt you. You're still counting.
Yes, there are too many.
There's just too many. All right, perhaps the perfect time for me to interrupt you then, because I want to talk about your farewell speech. You called for the SANDF to be better funded in order to deal with what you said are some of the threats, such as the Mozambican insurgency we saw recently. What would you say then is the ideal budget for the South African National Defence Force?
When we follow the international standards, the ideal budget is 2% of the GDP. But when you look at all the successful countries...
How much is that in rand terms, General? 2% of the GDP?
I stand to be corrected. I don't think really I can now really say exactly this is our amount in rand, but the figures that we've presented to National Treasury is quite a substantial amount. But we are mindful that the economy the world over is not doing very well. There is a meltdown. But, serious countries, when there's economic meltdown, the first thing that they should consider is the safety and security. Because once you've created a safe environment, then it is easy for investments to flow. And by the way, the military itself also contribute towards the fiscus, because we invest a lot in research and development, and we've got military industry, which also, when you look at the amount of money that they put in the fiscus, when the defense force is properly funded, it's quite substantial. And the skills that they give to our people and transfer to our youngsters is quite enormous, and that's human capital that any country would love to invest in. And by the way, in most countries all over the world, cell phones or whatever, they are developed from the military. It's military technology used actually for civilian use.
General, the flip side of this budgetary debate is that the SANDF has been engaged in what can only be described as wasteful expenditure. What am I talking about? For example, your department was invoiced for an amount of 260 million rand What was this for? Well, it was called a skin cancer drug imported from Cuba to try and fight COVID-19. Did you finally pay that full amount of 260 million?
I'm not sure with regard to this in the payment on TV, but I think I want to correct that notion. That notion is not correct. That drug is Interferon B, and it's the drug that helps your body interferon to be able to fight a virus when you catch it. And then, because at a time when the South African National Defence Force advised that actually we should import a drug from Cuba, everybody in the world were rushing for the drug. And then South Africa, because of the relationship that we enjoy with Cuba, we were advised that okay, you can get a drug at cost from the Cubans. And I must also indicate that the whole country was at a standstill, and the Surgeon General, in his wisdom, and the decision that we support, all of us as a military command, felt it prudent that we must get a drug so that we can be able to protect our forces when they go and help in the combat of coronavirus, so that we should mitigate against fatalities. And then I want to put it on record that this drug is being used in places like Italy, Canada, Spain, Germany, a number of countries. China, actually, they were using it. And then you also look at this now, the Cuban forces, doctors that are deployed all over the world, over 5,000 of them. And I don't know of any of them who have died as a result of Ebola or COVID, because they boost their immune system. And then I think, as a South African National Defence Force and the Surgeon General, who's got the responsibility that he protect the forces, in his wisdom, he made a good decision that we should protect our people so that they should not die, and in fact also their families.
All right. So to your knowledge then, General, of this 260 million rand invoice, how much of that has been paid over for the importation of this drug?
You know, I don't want to give you inaccurate information. I'm not sure at this point in time how far has been paid, but we've got to pay it.
Yeah.
Because service rendered, and service rendered must be paid for. And I must also indicate there's nothing wrong with the drug. If people have a problem with Cuba, they should not link what is good from that particular country and try to make it bad. You know, we've got to be realistic and objective when we look at issues. Even if you don't like somebody, but when a person does good, you must accept the good that he does.
All right. So I take it then, General, that a large number of members of the military have used this particular drug in order to protect themselves from COVID-19. Is that the case?
I will be not 100% correct, because as we speak right now, what we are throwing with some of the structures internally, but I think that matter can be best addressed by the Surgeon General.
My goodness. So that means that that consignment rather, it's sitting somewhere within our military bases, and it simply is waiting for some kind of instruction for it to be used on military personnel. Is that what you say?
I think so.
35 million rand, General, is the amount that we are definitely sure of, which has been admitted to as well by yourselves, that it has been spent thus far on this consignment of the Hebron Interferon. Am I correct?
Yes.
Would you say that this was money well spent, given that none of this has actually been used on your members?
Money well spent for a good purpose and for the safety and the safety of our own forces. But, you know, sometimes, when we sit and look at things, we need to be as objective as possible and be fair and honest to ourselves, irrespective whichever view that we have. But we must accept the reality. The reality of the matter is that Cuban interferon works. And then I want anybody to pinpoint anywhere in the world where there's a Cuban doctor who has died while they are fighting Ebola or the coronavirus. Let them show us this, because I don't think the Defense Force just woke up in the morning and say, no, we want the Cuban interferon. That was as a result of well-researched research done by our medical practitioners. And they consulted with their colleagues from China, all over the continent, and they came to that conclusion that if we are to protect the lives of our people, this is what should happen. But like I said, I'm not a medical practitioner. I think the doctors can talk much more better on that, because I listen to what our medical practitioners are saying, because they're specialists in that environment.
All right. Perhaps as we move on from this subject, General, I listened with interest when you said there is toing and froing about whether or not to use this drug on your members. That tells us quite clearly that the consignment has not been used. What is the toing and froing about, and who is actually arguing about it?
I just want to put it clear that it's not on the side of the Defense Force. Yeah, and I think, as you are aware, the Surgeon General has been entrusted with the responsibility to protect the forces. And then we are dependent on the wisdom of the Surgeon General. And the other issues are matters that I think are internal, that need to be sorted out between the Defense Force and other bodies.
This is Politics Unscripted. We are in conversation with the outgoing General of the South African National Defense Force. That's General Solly Shoke. General, thank you very much for staying on with us. You have served under a number of ministers and indeed presidents. Perhaps more relevant right now are the words that you said to Minister Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula during your farewell speech, and I quote, we may have differed at times, but we never had irreconcilable differences. I'm picking on those words very deliberately, General, because I want to ask of you to share with us some of the difficult periods that you've had to overcome with the Minister Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula.
No, only if I may come there. You know, when you've got difference of opinion, when you look at the matters, you are bound to have difference of opinion if you apply your mind on the issues. But because we're united in purpose, therefore we'll have to find a middle road or a compromise, in fact, in order for us to be able to move forward. So when I said irreconcilable differences, is that when now, differences that we cannot meet each other. So as people, we are bound, when you look at issues, to have your own opinion, and you're entitled to your own opinion. You know, it's just like when you take a coin, there's a head and a tail. Now it depends from which angle you look at the problem. But you find that what you see is a head, and the other one see a tail. But in totality, is a coin and is a two-rand coin.
So, I guess what I'm trying to do here, General, I have specific issues that I would like to explore with you, but I thought you would share with me at least one example of a difficulty that you may have had, and you and the minister worked together and you overcame whatever difficulty that might have been.
Xoli, listen, I must say, and I will let you frank and honest with you. If I differ with you on something, our differences should be internally, they end up there. what is more important is the outcome, the solution that actually we are able to provide.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure if you are married, you'll have a different of opinion with your wife, and you'll not go out and say, no, I differed with my wife on ABCD, because now you're going to destroy the family.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. Let me point you then to what perhaps I would surmise and say this probably would have counted as a difficult point in your life as the general of the South African National Defence Force. There was the famous incident, General, of the lift that an ANC delegation was given by the South African Defence Force to Zimbabwe. This was in September last year. And I wonder whether this particular incident would count among the low points that you would describe as having been experienced with your minister.
Not at all.
Not at all.
Not at all. To me, that is not an issue at all. And it's not a matter that is in my scope.
Mm-hmm.
I will not elaborate on that. But, you know, when you are confronted with a situation and you make a decision, it's easy for people to judge after the effect. Because when you look at wars that have been fought, you find people who have never been in those battles now sitting down and analyzing them in offices and now correctly finding the mistakes of what should have been done. But what they fail to do is now to be in the mindset of a person who was in the battlefield at that point in time when he or she made a decision. Because I'm one of the persons that, you know, if a person make a decision, whether the decision is right or wrong, as long as he has made a decision and with the noblest intentions, I'll forgive that particular individual than any person who is indecisive and doesn't make a decision at all.
How would you then respond, General, to critics who say that particular incident was a clear demonstration of the abuse of public office by the minister concerned, and in all probability, she would not have done this without your help in it, which is why, by the way, the ANC had to pay back the money for the lift that was given to their delegation?
You know, I'm not a politician. I'm a military man. And then the first of all, the question is, what was the purpose of the visit? Was it going to benefit an individual, or was it going to benefit the country? Was it going to create peace, or so on? And then, irrespective of what were the prevailing conditions by then. Yeah, so politicians, they criticize one another, they compete for space. I'm not in that space.
How would you say it benefited the country, General?
I don't know what was, the question is, what was the purpose of the visit? And what was going to be the benefit to our country? That's how, in fact, I would look at it. But it was at political level, and it was not at a space where I play, and that I would always try to venture into. Therefore, I'm not competent person to venture into that space, in fact, and make my own judgment. Yeah. Even if I may have my own opinion, I'll not make it public.
General, I want to then take a few steps back and ask you to cast your mind back to the 10th of April last year. The 10th of April 2021 marked a full year since the brutal killing of Collins Khosa, a resident of Alexandra, at the hands of the South African National Defence Force. But before we go further, I'd like you to just have a listen at Vincent Ngcobo, the Chief of Staff in the SANDF, And the words that he imparted to your members before that all-important national lockdown we all experienced last year. Let's take a listen.
They beat him. I can say they beat him to death because he died after those beatings. After the way they beat him, I did saw some of the beatings outside. They were beating him here, and they used that yard for the face. And then they carried her hand like at the back, so that those ones can also kick him on the stomach. Yeah.
When they see you, they must see brothers and sisters who came to relieve them from the distress. When they see you, they must see the defense force that is protecting them, as we have pledged this in our code of conduct. We have pledged to defend this country and its people as the citizens ourselves and as volunteers. We are called upon to do exactly what we have pledged in our code of conduct, and we have called upon to do what we have sown in when we took up this duty of being the defense force.
That was Vincent Ngobo, Chief of Staff in the South African National Defense Force. General, before that, you listened to the words of the wife of the now deceased Collins Khosa. That's Miss Nomsa Muncha. The culture, General, as you leave the SANDF, the culture that you have instilled in men and women in uniform, how would you characterize that culture?
Okay, first of all, I think we are a disciplined defense force, and we should be a disciplined defense force. A defense force that must have the interests of our people at heart and the country. Defense force of members who are loyal, and defense force that must be trusted by the people of this country. And defense force of people who are honest and then who will preserve the assets at their disposal as enshrined in our code of conduct.
But the experience, though, General, of ordinary citizens is clearly starkly different to what you are telling us now about how men and women in uniform should carry themselves. I want for the viewers to just listen to your words. These are your words now. At that very moment, last year, when the SANDF was being deployed to the streets of South Africa to basically enforce the lockdown. Let's just take a listen. All right, it looks like that particular soundbite is not ready. But basically, your words there, General, were that you are not capacitated to enforce or to be, you're not police officers. Yours is to essentially scop and donor. I think those are the words that I think South Africans will remember you by. Is that the culture that you have or that you leave behind?
Let me just correct that. Thank you that actually you are coming with that.
Yes.
I think actually that thing is distorted, that information, and it is misplaced. That was in Parliament when people were saying we must go and fight the gangsters. And then I said, okay, if you say now you want the defense force to go and fight with the gangsters, people, the country must be able to accept the consequences of that. Because one thing for sure that would not allow, as a South African National Defense Force, is for a criminal to try to chase a member of the defense force in uniform. That one will not tolerate. Because then otherwise we would have lost the country at all. Then once we come in, there must be law and order. That part, that clip, actually, when they put it for the lockdown, I think it was some people who manipulated technology. I've said that in Parliament, and I still say it now, that when you deploy the defense force to fight crime and all those things, you must also be prepared to live the consequences. Because we are not supposed, we will not allow a member of the soldier to be chased by a criminal with a knife or a gun. Because then this is the last line of defense. And people must know that there should be law and order. They must respect the law.
General, if we look, for example, or if we leave the brutality aside, because I gather that you are going to defend the behavior of your men and women in uniform. Let me talk about another issue that has plagued...
No, let me just correct that one.
Okay.
This defense was brutality.
Right.
And I will never defend any brutality. But you see, sometimes people look at the outcome. You see, for each and every outcome, there's an input and a throughput that will give you the outcome. Yes, I want to put it on record that we will not tolerate any brutality or any act of criminality in the defense force.
So how have we dealt with the issues of brutality?
We have never tolerated that, and will never defend that, and even the incoming chief will never defend any brutality. But all that we need to do is that when we look at situations, we need to be fair. Yes.
General, perhaps as we move on from issues of brutality and misbehavior by members of the military, one particular issue that does stand out is the issue of sexual exploitation that has been reported about. Your men and women deployed abroad to basically maintain peace and order in countries that are in conflict. Your members accused of exploiting women in those countries sexually. This is, by the way, an issue that has been investigated formally. So again, I go back to this issue of organizational culture, or a culture that you leave behind in the SANDF. The argument here, General, is that you leave behind a South African army personnel who have no problems in humiliating or being aggressors when it suits them. Do you agree with that narrative?
No, not at all. Actually, let me just put things into perspective. We in the South African National Defence Force, in the entire peacekeeping operation in the DRC, we are the only country that have deployed law enforcing agencies, officers, to deal with any act of misbehavior, including sexual abuse. And then we are among the only people who report such incidences when they do okay. And we are the only institution that have instituted the initiative to investigate that, and we did that in public to demonstrate that we will not tolerate acts of misbehavior, any misbehavior. And then those that have been found wanting have been charged. Evidence is there. And I must correct you, it is a tiny minority of individuals, because the rest of the members of the Defense Force are well disciplined, and that is why they were able to register the successes that they've registered. Because if they were not disciplined, I'm sure even the UN would have said, we don't want you in there. And even internal operations, our members, they take the risks, and they risk their lives in order to help our people. You know, when the health professionals go on strike, these are our people who go to mortuaries, who go to hospitals to help people. When there are floods, it is our people who build bridges, all sorts of activities. And that is a demonstration of a highly disciplined force. Because, by the way, they do that while they are also affected, or they've got vested interest in the outcome of those discussions that they were in discussions. But because their priority is our people and our country, they forget about our own personal interests and serve our people.
Yeah. All right, General. In our final conversation, I'd like to talk to you about something that you warned about some time ago, that politics in the South African military do not have a place. I want to take you back to those very words as to why you were forced to say those words. We'll do that in just a moment. You are watching Politics Unscripted. It is the debut show today, and we are in conversation with the outgoing chief of the South African National Defence Force, General Solly Shoke. General, before the break, I made it clear that I was going to ask you about the very interesting comments that you were forced to make at some point in your life as the head of the South African Army, and that is that politics do not have a place in your organization. Yours is to protect the sovereignty of this country. Why were you forced to issue that warning almost?
Let me take you backward, Xoli. You know, the South African National Defence Force is a product of 7 former opposing forces that were brought together to build the South African National Defence Force. And they have diverse political background. And now, if you want to build, we had to ensure that we take politics out of the Defence Force, because people are going to differ, and be united in servicing our people. And those who wanted to go into politics, it is clear that we made it clear that please go to politics and get out of the Defence Force.
What prompted those words, General? What prompted those words? What was going on at the time?
No, when you think, you reflect backward before 1994 and 1994, you realize that actually we come from diverse backgrounds, different political affiliations. There are those actually who come from the former Defence Force, former liberation movements, who are opposed to one another. The Homeland Defence Forces, they've got different ideological differences. But then if you want to build a Defence Force of today and a Defence Force of the future, is that you must take politics out of the Defence Force. Because the Defence Force should not be used as a political instrument. It should be something that should rise above party politics and serve the people of this country. Because we've got people with diverse political background in South Africa. They are opposing one another. You can see them in Parliament, and you don't want to see what is happening in Parliament in the Defence Force, and we will not tolerate that one. If you come here, you become a politician in the Defence Force, and the door is open. Go out.
General, let me go directly to why I asked you this question. In July 2018, a very well publicized story about SANDF soldiers who are also ANC members, who allegedly wanted to use the military as a tool to advance their political interests. Now, let me remind you, or the viewers, what was going on at the beginning of 2018. That's the time that the ANC was attempting to recall its deployee in government in the office of president. That's former President Jacob Zuma. I want to quote specifically the headline of a City Press article which said, and I quote, "How Ramaphosa dodged a coup. Security bosses reveal all." Was that the instance, General, or at least part of what motivated your statements?
No, there was no substance to that. If you have been following my speeches in public, long before, when I was still chief of the army, I've been emphasizing the issue of unity the issue of rising above petty party politics, the issue of loyalty to the country and its people. And I've been saying throughout that let us serve our people and forget our own selfish interests. So that one, it was not anything new. And then, yes, you know, there will be people who will try to influence members of the defense force. And as the military leadership, we've got to be firm. And tell people that if you want to venture into politics, please, not in this defense force. Because we are building a defense force of the future. And the security of our people is dependent on a cohesive national defense force. And our people must have confidence and trust in us. And they can only trust us if they see that we are non-partisan.
So I take it then, General, that that is a tacit admission that ANC politics have attempted to play themselves out in the South African Defence Force.
No. Not at all. You have individuals there and there who will some actually Nicodemus leak information to political parties. And it is those individuals that will always have to warn that their loyalty must not be at political parties, must be with the South African National Defence Force and the people of this country.
General Solly Shoke, I thank you very much for coming through to talk to us here. It has indeed been a pleasure to talk to you, and do take your retirement. Go well, sir. Enjoy your retirement.
No, thank you, Xoli. I hope I will not retire. I'll always be available to assist my country in one way or the other.
Thank you very much, General Solly Shoke, the outgoing chief of the South African National Defence Force. Well,